Hi, it's me, Kay Cook, and I'm here again to talk about thriving in this current situation and building resilient skills for life. And I'm absolutely delighted to have a conversation with somebody who's very important in my world, and that is Dr. Richard Bandler. So welcome, Richard. Thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Kay.
I wonder if, first of all, you might be able to share some thoughts about the topic of resilience. How do you see it as a big chunk?
Well, resilience, in a nutshell, is your ability to rebound from difficulty. And on planet Earth, I can guarantee you things will go wrong. People die, people have divorces, business collapses. I prefer not to think of this as the COVID-19, but as the grand pause. We've all had to take a grand pause in our life. And the question is, do you look at it as in terms of what disaster it could be? A lot of the people I've talked to are sitting around fantasizing getting the virus. And I think that's bad planning. I think that if you get the virus, you should be thinking about getting over it. And if you don't, you should be thinking about how to avoid it. And more importantly, how to spend that extra time. I got a thing from the local symphony here in Dallas, and they sent us a thing, and they said, during the grand pause, we're going to broadcast on a certain station, and we're going to rehearse even more special pieces of music. And they went down a list of things they were going to do to become a better orchestra. And I think all of us should look at this grand pause as an opportunity to, number one, catch up on things. Number two, the opportunity to plan how we're going to come back ferociously. And you see, if you're going to make pictures in your head, you might as well make ones where you succeed. Because your brain is going to do what you think about. Once you start thinking about things, your whole neurology lines up to follow it. Successful athletes don't sit around and imagine failing unless they go into a slump. And every time I work with an athlete who's done really well for a while and then starts doing poorly, they start asking questions like, what if? People are telling me, they go, what if this never ends? And I'm going, well, if it never ends, we'd all be dead. It's going to end. Everything ends. War II, people thought it would never end because it went on so long, but they kept thinking about how to end it. And that's what got it over with. When you look at yourself in your mind and you see yourself having problems, resilience is built out of changing that picture, just literally whiting it out and putting a better picture in its place. People survived concentration camps in World War II, and they didn't survive it by giving up. The people who gave up literally faded away and died. The people I talked to, because when I wrote the book, The Secrets of Being Happy, we found out that there's medical research that goes on. Garner Thompson researched all the medical research about how being happy allows you to have a stronger immune system, how to recover from surgery faster. The list goes on and on and on. It's good for you to be a happy person. But happy wasn't like la 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 laughing. Happy was when people felt they had a purpose. And when you think to yourself, what am I going to do as this ends? When you start planning and methodically, especially small business people are being hit very hard, they have to start thinking about how they're going to use the spare time to be very prepared to come back ferociously, because people aren't going to be jumping into restaurants and running out to have their nails done. They're all going to be a little paranoid, so you're going to have to entice them. You're going to have to make sure that your place of business looks safe and is safe. And if you're a resilient person, what it means is when you get hit over the head with the worst of everything, your response is to become more determined. And it's funny, whenever I was interviewing people early in my career, I noticed something funny. A lot of very successful people. And I would ask them the question, I said, what made you, when you were so poor with so little resources, determined to be able to take this business to be so successful? About 3/4 of them stopped and put their fingers here. And they go, let me think about it. Their expression would change and they'd start to talk. So I started talking to my clients who were not so determined and getting them to focus on these 2 points right below the eye. And if you just concentrate in your mind and you think about it, you let your focus of your attention go to your ears and then just go across to here and focus, you'll discover you just feel more determined for some reason. I don't know what it is. It's probably some connection between your neurons in your brain and your eyes and states of consciousness. I'm sure neurologically we'll figure it out someday. But in the meanwhile, once you start to feel a little determined, you start to make pictures of your being more determined. The more determined you are, the more resilient you will be. Because I guarantee you, all of us are going to take a hit. I've been home for 3 weeks. They've canceled almost everything I'm doing this year. And, I'm having to juggle all kinds of things. But I'm not thinking about going under. I'm thinking about how I'm going to make it through and how I'm going to come back twice as strong. And that's what I think everybody should be doing. The other thing is, during this grand pause, is a perfect opportunity to be determined to catch up on the things you haven't caught up on, clean that closet you haven't cleaned, to stay in the mode of being busy, of having a purpose. Don't just let this time wear you down, because then you won't be resilient. When people have a purpose, they're always a lot more happy. Make a list of all the things you've meant to do. A lot of people wanted to start painting, start drawing, start playing music, go back and play the guitar again. This is a perfect opportunity, because probably when you started those things, the internet wasn't as full of lessons as it is now. And my grandson came to visit me once. He came in my studio and he looked at the guitar and he said, I'm learning to play the guitar. And I said, would you like a lesson? And he said, nah, there are thousands of them on YouTube that are better than you are. And, to me, I didn't even know that. He started turning on things on my computer, and there were great musicians giving lessons. And I thought, that's great. I wish that had been around when I was young. Your ability to learn new things is endless given the internet. And if you take those bad pictures in your head, shut them down, and make pictures of spending your time wisely, you will become more resilient.
So Richard, you were talking about this grand pause, and that is just such a cool term I hadn't heard, and instantly I'm seeing animal pause, the grand pause. And it is a gap, isn't it, as you rightly say, where we can utilize this, we can transform. It's like an opportunity to, I feel like create or alchemize something wonderful out of it, so that it's been a really useful experience. One of the obstacles to that I see a lot in my world is that people who have a sense of purpose that you've identified as being really important to us, they make their purpose survival rather than thriving. And most of my work is about catching them in a state of stress and transforming that stress towards the possibilities of thriving. Do you think that some people are just born with a natural propensity to want to focus on survival rather than the opportunities for thriving? Or do you think that's something that people acquire over time and habituate?
I actually don't care, to tell you the truth, because I don't think it's genetic. They say survival is the strongest instinct, but many years ago, Virginia Satir, who was one of my teachers, asked me what I thought the strongest instinct in human beings was. And like a little robot, I said survival. And she said, no, she said, people will kill themselves rather than face the unknown. And, you know, that they're in a marriage for 30 years and one person divorces the other and one goes and hangs themselves in the closet. And, you know, I lived in San Francisco for many years. And every year there'd be 10 or 15 people who would jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. That's not survival being the strongest instinct. And in fact, I think the strongest instinct in human beings is to make things familiar. It's what your brain is designed to do. And, you know, being in survival mode, especially for people, you know, who, you know, because survival can be about self-esteem or it can be about poverty. Right now, people are out, you know, trying to outbuy each other in toilet paper. It's hysterical to go to the supermarket and you turn the corner and there's an empty shelves where the paper towels used to be and empty shelves where the toilet paper used to be. It's starting to let up now. I notice there's actual, you know, a certain amount of toilet paper they put out with the sign, one to a customer. Like you'd need to tell somebody that. I mean, good God, how long do they think this is going to go on? They need 500 rolls of toilet paper to survive this. That's not a very optimistic point of view. And, you know, for some people, it becomes something that they can grasp. If I have enough toilet paper, I'll make it through. But making it through is simply not enough. You want to make it through gloriously. And the way to do that is to spend the currency of life intelligently. The currency of life is not money, contrary to what many people believe. The currency of living is how you spend each moment. And you don't know how many moments you're going to get in your life. Some people discovered that way too late here. And the currency of living are your moments. And if you don't plan how you're going to spend them, you don't spend them wisely. It's just like money. You know, in our country, we have a financial guy that goes on the radio all the time and helps people get out of debt because there's so many people in debt. And he's wrote a book, Living Debt Free, and tells you how to get down your credit card debt and your mortgage payments till you get to the point where you don't owe anybody anything. He says the new Mercedes of the next decade is being debt free instead of having a fancy car. And certainly given Uber, you don't even need a car, especially if you live in a city. Me, I prefer to drive myself. I'm an old guy. I like it that way. I don't like driving around with a teenager at the wheel. It's just not my thing. But, you know, how you plan and spend the moments of your life is the most important thing of all. And if you've got this and you know for a couple of months it's going to be like this, or a month it's going to be like this, make a big plan so you have more to do than you have time to spend. It's the best thing to fail at, is to have so many things that you can get done that, you know, because when you're busy working and doing things, you're not getting these things done. And that includes spending time with your family and with your kids. And, you know, there'll be a point where you'll have enough of it and you'll want a break. So you're going to have to figure out how to do that, whether it's going in the other room or, you know, driving very slowly to the supermarket. You know, the way it's not what you do with your time, it's the quality of how you spend it. And if you spend it wisely, you live wisely.
Do you think that then that what this grand pause, one of the wonderful things that will come out of it is people's awareness of things that really matter to them, like how they spend their time, like how they are interacting with their family or pets or whatever it might be, and who they're missing. Do you think there'll be a shift in some people's values?
I think the people who spend their time wisely will appreciate it. I think the more people we can get to do that, the better. I don't think it would be instinctual for human beings. Uh, you know, there's a real difference. Most of the people that I've modeled who are successful at things ask certain good questions. And the people that come in as clients, whether they're rich or poor, all ask the same bad questions. But what if? But what if this never ends? But, what if I get so far in debt I can never get out? These kinds of loaded questions get you to think bad thoughts, make bad pictures, talk to yourself in bad tonality, make bad feelings, and it all feeds on itself. And whether there's a grand pause or not, that's been I've been working. And we never seem to run out of people that know how to that know how to undermine the quality of their own life. And it's all done with bad planning. Part of the reason I wrote the book Thinking on Purpose was because over all the years that I've worked with people, the one thing that I can count on is that most people have confused remembering with thinking. So therefore they say, I think I can't do something. They're only remembering that they haven't. They're not thinking that they can and trying it in a new way. My great uncle became a millionaire, which was a big deal, in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, 3 times, and got completely wiped out, not because of something he did, but because of external forces. One was the unions destroyed his business. And, he had like the 4th largest trucking company in the Northeast, and the unions firebombed his trucks because he wouldn't join the union, because his employees didn't want to, because he paid them more than the union did. And they eventually took the whole company away from him. He drove away, and he had absolutely nothing but a broken down old car. And when he got to New York, the car broke. And he rolled into a gas station, and the guy said he couldn't fix it till the weekend because there was no way for him to shut down the station and go buy parts. And so my uncle asked him how many cars he needed parts for, and went and bought all the parts, and he got them at a discount and sold them and built up another big business out of it. He did that 3 times. And he told me, he said, when, a whole business fails, then you have to do the most important thing. He said, you have to be able to listen quietly inside, because there's this amazing thing that happens. All the people who are talking and whining aren't listening and watching. And the people who listen and watch will find something to do, an opportunity to learn. I went into a diner once when I was fairly young, I think probably in my late teens, early 20s. And there were 2 people, and one was complaining about something, and one was complaining about the fact that he didn't make enough money and blah, 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 blah. And the other was complaining about all these rich people and, how, they all got it too easy and everything came to them too easy. And I looked down on the floor between the 2 of them, and there was a $50 bill on the floor, crumpled up, but sitting underneath the stool. And I got up and I bent over and I picked up the $50 bill, and I looked under the guy next to me, and there was a quarter. So I picked that up too. And then I looked the other way, and there was $1. And it was about 3 or 4 bar stools down, and I went down and picked up the $1. So while they were busy whining, money was sitting on the floor. And I always remember that, because when you're quiet and you quiet the inside and you look for opportunity in every instance, and if you just listen to the news, they're going to program you to, their news people are always trying to make things worse, to make it more dramatic. I don't care what our president does, they always go, but what if, and they go, but what if it gets worse? And why didn't you do this? And why didn't you know everything ahead of time? And, you coulda, woulda, shoulda. And I'm fond of telling my students, you can shit in one hand and wish in the other, one of them will stick. And especially if you smack yourself in the face with them, you'll know which one. It's not about wishing, it's about noticing. It's about planning. And if you make good plans in your mind, when the moment is right, you will find it.
Colleagues, one of our NLP colleagues I was talking to the other day, and he was telling me that, having been in Florida with us a few weeks ago, sort of got on a plane, arrived back to the UK, suddenly realised that the airport was very different, and he was the only customer for the cab driver, and he got home and realised that, of course, the UK was imploding with this current situation. And he runs a really big company, and in that time his whole brain was, oops, I'm losing everything, all of my training is being cancelled, or my customers are postponing everything. And in that sort of very short period of time, he just reorganized it all and said, right, what do I need to do now? I have to do something different. And he started to organize, think about online training programs, and how to capitalize on the opportunities that were now presenting themselves. And I think for a lot of us, we are running as fast as we can to suddenly learn how to do things with Zoom, for example, and put together hybrid online programs to hold people just long enough until we can see them face to face again. That whole movement thing seems to be really important. When you talk about the thinking on purpose, which is such an important statement for all of us in our work, the remembering how to behave versus deciding how to behave, to think and then feel and then do, requires a bit of a skill and a wisdom, I feel, in order to run that forward.
It requires practice.
And practice.
And it requires that you do it on purpose. And sometimes when we do things on purpose, they don't feel natural until you do them for a while. I learned that learning to play the piano. There's nothing natural about what you do when you learn to play the piano. Comes easier to some people than others. I don't know if that's genetics or neurology or whatever it is, but certainly even the best musician I've ever met, when they learn something new, it feels awkward. And you do it enough times, and you sleep a few times, and you wake up, and suddenly it becomes second nature. And thinking on purpose should become second nature to everyone, because this is not the only grand pause and little pause life is going to give you. There's going to be stuff that happens that's going to disrupt things. Bad things will happen. And the question is, what do you do? It's not if it's going to happen. Every relationship that you have is going to end in tragedy for one of you, because somebody's going to die first. And if it becomes the end of the world, I mean, I've had clients that grieved. They came to me from a psychiatrist, and they've been grieving for over 30 years over the loss of someone, still dressed in black, not that I don't dress in black a lot, but I don't dress in black a lot because somebody died. I just, I find that I don't get it as dirty as other colors. But when they came to me, I had to get them to stop remembering and making it the biggest picture in their head. Because, you can relive any bad memory as many times as you want. That doesn't make it a good plan. And, I found if you just shrink these pictures down to the size of a quarter, blink them black and white, they don't come up so much. And, it's not a psychological trick, it's a neurological trick. My book is filled with all kinds of things like that to make it easier for people to think. Because when you change the way to think, it changes the way you feel. And therefore it changes what you're capable of doing. When you get used to doing it, it becomes more automatic. That's why it doesn't surprise me that one of my students in Florida went home and went, oh my God, everything is falling apart. And then answered the question, what can I do about it now? And how can I do better in the future? When I was talking about Dave Ramsey earlier, the guy that's the financial guru. He's trying, not only does he get people out of debt, he tells them that they need an emergency fund. And I don't care who you are, you need a backup fund. You know, the older you get in life, the more you need to have a backup fund so that if something goes wrong. My mother one time called me on the phone and she goes, I had everything under control in my life and my septic tank flooded. And she goes, and now I'm going to have to remortgage my house. I finally paid off my mortgage. And I asked her, I said, when you were paying your mortgage, didn't you put some money in the bank? I gave her money every month. All she had to do is take a part of it and keep sticking it in the bank. And 30 years later, she would have had a pile for an emergency fund. But a lot of people don't plan on the fact that things are going to go wrong. And they will, and you either have to hawk what you already have, or you have to plan. This is a good time for people to notice what they didn't do so that they plan to do it in the future. Set aside an emergency fund, do things, some people invested in the stock market too heavily, took a pretty big hit. The problem when you take a hit in the stock market, like in 2008, is that if you have $1,000 worth of stock and it drops in half, right, because the stock market goes down, then you have half that much to invest to get back. And so if the stock market goes right back up to where it is, you're only going to have 70% of what you had anyway. Because, given that it's invested across a lot of stocks, you're investing $500. You're not investing $1,000. Your $1,000 would go back up to where it was, but that 700 would go back up to 1,000. But it doesn't go back up the way it goes down. When you lose money, you lose money unless you keep the same stocks and they go exactly back to where they were, which is not what most people do in the stock market. They invest across portfolios. And when you invest across portfolios, when you're investing, 50 or 70% of what you had, it takes twice as long to get back to where you were. The stock market would have to go 20% or 30% higher just to get back to where you were for retirement. So it's always a good idea to have backup money, that you can use to survive difficult times. In this case, a lot of people weren't even prepared. They didn't even have backup toilet paper, for heaven's sakes. There are certain supplies you should keep around. I'm not a survivalist, but I keep a little survivalist food around just in case for some reason the food supply gets interrupted for a period of time. You need backup food, backup water, backup money. You never know whether there's going to be an act of God. And certainly a virus is an act of God, or in this case, an act of China. People keep saying it's not China's fault, but when you have experimental places, looking at flus next to wet markets, and they're only 500 feet apart, I find that unnerving. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't know that we'll ever know exactly what happened. But I know that they weren't honest with us enough that we could have closed our borders sooner. It will be nice when they have a vaccine for this. But in the meanwhile, everybody seems to be doing the right thing. In most places, at first they weren't. I noticed that at spring break, teenagers were all going to Fort Lauderdale and running around on the beach. They had to close the beaches to get them off. Young people always think they're immortal, and they were saying that young people couldn't get this. Well, that's not necessarily true. They might not die from it, but it doesn't mean they can't spread it. And, staying home, if this thing only survives for 14 days and we all stay home for a couple of months, it'll die out, but never entirely. And so, we'll have to have proper treatments and take care of it. And all the governments seem to be doing what they're supposed to, at least as far as I can tell. I don't know at what point we'll ever be truly safe from this. Certainly I'm, over 70, so I fall in that category where I'm supposed to be very vulnerable. But there was a guy in his 90s who got it and survived. So, you know, which guy are you going to be? The guy that gives in or the guy that survives? To me, you should always plan strongly. And, you know, if you even imagine yourself getting sick, then imagine yourself getting well and over it quickly, you know, and better to just, you know, build a barrier around yourself and decide you're not going to be one of the ones that get it, and do the best you can. And if you do, then heal yourself as quickly as possible and start thinking about what you're going to do on the other side of the grand pause.
I think that's really good advice. I remember when we were in Orlando a month or so ago, you emphasized to us all the importance of staying in good shape neurologically, to get really good chemistry so that our immune systems had the best possible chance of being supported. And that requires us to relax. And whilst we can be vigilant about washing our hands and basic hygiene, I think it's really cool that
20 seconds. It doesn't count if you don't wash it for 20 seconds. It breaks down the protein that surrounds the virus. If you just wash your hands for 2 seconds, it doesn't do any good. It requires that you rub and the surface of your arms, your forearms and your hands for 20 seconds. That will break down the proteins. And it ain't that hard. 20 seconds is not that long.
My husband is a transplant patient, and many years ago, when he was on dialysis, and we had a bathroom all set up with these big diagrams and the special scrubs and, you know, all, how to wash your hands properly. And I was always really curious about why we didn't teach that in school, the importance of washing your hands properly. And, you know,
especially in school, because it's like bacteria village. My kids were always coming home with a pink eye, and they were always childhood. When I was young, every childhood disease went through the schools and closed them. Measles, mumps, chicken pox, you know, we all got them all. Now they have vaccines for most of those things. But, you know, in our communities, it's very odd that they don't teach people that when you wash your hands, you have to do in between the fingers and, you know, and the wrists as well. I mean, if somebody sneezes on you or expires germs when they're talking to you within 2 or 3 feet, and, you know, there's a very fine mist that comes out. When we record here in the studio, we use little things that cover the microphones, because otherwise that actually could be heard on the recordings. They're called popper stoppers. And every time you hit a P or a T, something flies out. And it will hit the microphone, and you can actually audibly hear it. It's not just the wind that passes through. It's, you know, it's small amounts of saliva. And teaching kids, I think, you know, one of the good things that might come out of all of this is that children will learn to wash their hands. Schools will learn to keep them cleaner. Janitors will do a better job. Supermarkets will be cleaner. And restaurants will be cleaner, and, you know, we'll all be a lot more careful about that. And in many ways, that may protect us from all kinds of things. Some we know about and some we don't. You know, certainly there are lots of businesses that, you know, restaurants around here, the ones that I go to, you know, are now all delivering, which is kind of nice, but, you know, it's just not the same as going to a restaurant. I like the environment as well. I like a reason to get out of the house sometimes and not cook myself. And when they deliver, it's almost like you cook yourself. You still have to wash all the dishes and stuff. I'm a very lucky person. I actually have 2 dishwashers in my house, and I've been using them both a lot between cooking food and having food delivered. And I did notice that I have a tendency to clean the refrigerator out more than I used to. Been looking for that extra space so that I can bring more stuff home and go to the store less often. And the question about how we spend our time, and the time you spend in your mind is the most important of all. remember, when you ask the question, do you think it's genetic or do you think it's learned? I think it's about the beliefs we build, both growing up and later in life. That the question of whether somebody's a pessimist or an optimist has never been the question to me. When people say, are you a glass half full or glass half empty? I'm the person that's going, where are the rest of the glasses? And that whenever you have a belief that limits your choice and your ability to feel good, especially under, having these little vacations should be something where people their tendency is to relax, not to worry. And if it isn't, it's a good opportunity to go inside and start cleaning up the pictures in your head, changing the voices in your head. It's the one thing that belongs to you is the interior of your mind. And if you change the way you think, it will change the way you feel. And it will change what you're capable of doing. That people who tell me they can't learn a musical instrument, right, every time they pick it up and feel bad and make a sound and it doesn't sound right and they feel bad, if they change the way they feel and just start making sound and start following the instructions on YouTube, pretty soon they're going to be able to do it. But every mistake, everything that doesn't work should make you much more determined to do it another way.
I suppose the big lesson to take away from this conversation for me is determination, staying focused on the future, and how we obviously we have our hygiene, the way that hygiene and hand washing, but hygiene in the way that we organize our thoughts. But that determination, it's a really strong feeling. And
correct. Resilience is fueled by determination.
Yeah.
And if the more things don't go your way, the more determined you get, eventually you will succeed. That as long as you don't keep making the same mistakes, and the biggest mistake you can make is to go in and think that something should have worked when it didn't. And, basically the history of psychiatry and psychotherapy when I started was the history of all these schools of psychotherapy doing the same thing, and when clients didn't change, blaming it on the client. I simply made one thing. If something didn't work, I never did it again with that client. I looked at the case history as a list of things that wouldn't work instead of a description of the patient. And when I did that, then I started finding out what would work with this person. Over 50 years, I was successful where lots and lots and lots of other people had failed, only because I refused to do things that didn't work and tried anything. I took things out of science fiction. I took things from neurology. I tried all kinds of things. I had people take their pictures and just turn them around and see what was on the other side. Whatever it took to get somebody to feel different so that they could act differently in the world. The more they act differently, the more they thought differently, the better they felt. The road to success starts by changing the way you think. You change the way you think, it changes how you feel, and therefore it changes what you can do. So remembering is great when you're remembering something that works, but when you're remembering something that just makes you feel bad because it didn't work, stop thinking about it and think about something else.
Thank you. Amazing wisdom, as always. And you make it sound so simple. And
well, as you know, it actually is.
I know.
And, the hard part is starting to do it. And, most people just think the same way because they've always thought that way. And, I can't tell you how many times when I've looked at a client and I've asked them about stuff, and they, when I ask them, I go, you're terrified all the time. What are you thinking about? And they go, well, I got this great big picture of this horrible thing happening. And when I look at them and I go, has it ever occurred to you to just not make this picture? And a lot of them look at me and they go, I don't even think consciously I knew I was doing it. And I go, well, now that you do, let's take that picture and just white it out suddenly, or shrink it down to the size of a nickel and blink it black and white, or turn it upside down, or put circus music with it. And, you know, once you start doing even random things, you know, silliness is a lot better than suffering. And, you know, they always say you're going to look back and laugh. My policy is, why wait?
Absolutely. And I want to look back and feel proud of what I'm doing, what I did. A huge amount of that ability is because of NLP. At the moment, some of us NLP trainers, we're looking at beginning to offer small chunks of NLP training online. Of course, it's not going to be NLP training, but it's beginning to.
It is going to be NLP training. It's just not going to be a practitioner course. You can train people to think better and to make changes in themselves, and you can train people to help their clients. And there are some things that you can teach online, and some things you just got to be there for. And at this time, I think people should make the distinction between those things. And, you know, not everything has to be a certification course. You know, sometimes, you know, you just can take a subject and make that subject the course of, you know, something online and teach them about it. Certainly, you know, they're learning to change the way you think has a lot of dimensions to it. It goes on in business, it goes on in your personal life, it goes on in habits. You can give better piano lessons if you know how to visualize the keyboard in your mind and imagine what chords look like and put your fingers in them. There's tremendous amount of training that can be done online with NLP.
That's all part of the big adventure certainly for me and my business, and Zoom is one way to go, and it's a very exciting time for us, although obviously we're really looking forward to being able to see our clients in the flesh and our students in the flesh also very soon.
We're all looking forward.
We're all looking forward. When will we see you in the flesh next, Richard?
Well, apparently it's going to be September, if all things work out. John and Kathleen, I believe, moved the Orlando seminar to September, but that's tentative at this point. We'll let everybody know when we do, and I would just stay in touch with purenlp.com, and they'll tell you what's on the boards. richardbandler.com, tell you what's on the boards, and you know, if the people in Italy, stay in touch with the company over there, and you know, there's stuff going on everywhere. And as the world will open up at different times in different places, certainly we'll have to have air traffic and flying back again. And once that starts happening, then we'll all start moving again. But, you know, we don't want to do it too fast, and we don't want to do it too slow. It's like everything else in life. It has to have its own perfect rhythm. In the meanwhile, we'll all find alternatives like this as a way to connect with the people of the planet and tell them that we have something to offer. So I'd like to thank you for having me.
Richard, it's been an absolute delight and pleasure, and thank you so very much for your time, which I know is extremely precious. I hope that we in some way are able to inspire people with this conversation to focus a little bit more on what they're capable of doing, and then we can help people to redirect their skills and become even more resilient through this time and through the future. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully in the autumn, and take care.
All right, thank you so much.